Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to begin. If I can ask you to please turn off your cell phones to avoid any interruptions in the program. And if you do not want your photo taken, please let the Board of Trade staff know. We use photos for both internal and external publications. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. My name is Anita Haberman. I'm President and CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. And we haven't had this event actually since February 2020, just before the pandemic began. So we're so pleased to focus on what is so important for our economy, and that is our natural resource industries. And really important is really cultivating those indigenous partnerships with our resource industries. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territory of our Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Coquitlam, Kaikut, Semiahmoo, and Tawasin First Nations, and also our Inuit and Métis peoples. They have a profound connection to the land and water that surrounds our great city of Surrey. And I'd also like to announce that for the second time, we are partnering on a very significant Indigenous Partnerships Showcase event on May 31st to June 2nd at the Vancouver Convention Center. And it is a really blended approach to ensure an action plan on a variety of portfolios, working in partnerships with our hereditary chiefs, our chiefs of all of our Indigenous nations, not only within British Columbia, but also in the Cascadia Economic Corridor. We're very pleased to be a partner on this event, and we'll be there and encourage you to register. So look it up on our website at businessinsurrey.com. Events like this would not take place without sponsorship support. Let's give a great round of applause to our co-presenting sponsors, Woodfibre, LNG, and TC Energy. Our supporting sponsor is the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. And our community sponsor, an amazing company in Surrey focused on hydrogen technology, Simtech Manufacturing. Our ongoing sponsors, progress partners of the Surrey Board of Trade are BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada, Scotiabank, the Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan represented by SNF Benefits, the law firm of Fasken, and Western Community College. So we have an amazing event lined up for you this afternoon. Joining us shortly will be the Canadian Minister of Natural Resources, Jonathan Wilkinson. And we do have here with us the BC Minister of Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation, Josie Osborne. Gary Begg, MLA for Surrey-Guildford, is in the house. On behalf of Member of Parliament John Aldag is Megan Waddington. And City of Surrey Councillor Mike Bowes. He's on his way. Everyone, the Surrey Board of Trade, we are one of the top 10 largest chambers of commerce boards of trades in Canada. There are 430 of us. Our whole mandate is to support business, bring business into our great city of Surrey. We're going to be the largest city in British Columbia. They're now saying by 2036, moved up from 2040. We're still growing by 1,200, 1,400 people a month. And to show you a little bit about our great city of Surrey and the diversified service portfolio of the Surrey Board of Trade, please turn your attention to the screen. As one of the fastest growing cities in Canada, Surrey is an opportunity city. The Surrey Board of Trade is the concierge of connections.
Rick Mann from IOM Property Group. I'm a Director of Development and Construction. We rely on the Surrey Board of Trade for a lot of advocacy and research that we don't actively go out and find. Really, like there's things on there that I had no idea about, and I get the email, I get the web link, and it really affects us in a big way.
The Surrey Board of Trade is focused on making Surrey an opportunity city by instigating change at the different levels of government, offering a variety of business support services, international trade support services, and being the concierge of connections for the business community in Surrey.
My name is Rowena Rosati. I'm the Vice President of Healthcare and Innovation here at the Health and Technology District by the Lark Group. We focus on a lot of health and technologies and how we can bring different technologies and innovative healthcare solutions into the hands of clinicians. So there's a tremendous amount of information and support that Surrey Board of Trade offers to these companies, and it's an opportunity for me to be able to translate what the Surrey Board of Trade is doing for some of those companies and helping those companies to succeed.
If it's in the agricultural sector or in the retail sector, if they're needing a government connection, if they have an issue related to government, we are there for them, and we have a proven track record of success to ensure that businesses are helped when they need it in a timely way.
You know, the Surrey Board of Trade it's a great organization because anybody who is involved in that organization wants to be a more proactive member of the community. So having an opportunity to connect and network with those individuals helps our business become better.
So the Surrey Board of Trade offers an immense amount of support for businesses at all levels, including entrepreneurs and startup businesses. There are resources that help a business that they wouldn't necessarily be able to afford to contract on their own, and it allows those to be accessible, sometimes free of cost. It also creates opportunities for networking.
Whether you're a new business that's just opening up shop in Surrey, Surrey Board of Trade has to be one of your top destinations. It will connect you with a lot of the great minds in the organization, a lot of great minds in the community that can help.
So whether you're a small business or a medium-sized business or a large business, starting out or expanding, we have the connections. We have the resources to ensure that you have what you need during your journey as an entrepreneur. And actually, one of the celebrities from that video is in the house, Rick Mann from IOM Property Group. He's shaking his head. Everyone, it is Canada's Innovation Week, May 15th to May 19th. We are celebrating innovation across all industries in our great country. And today you are going to be hearing about innovation in the energy sector, LNG, forestry, and so on. And it is amazing what is happening. And you're going to hear about that innovation from our BC government and our Canadian government later on in the program. Please help me welcome our co-presenting sponsor from Woodfibre LNG, Selena Bassi. You have a bit of a fan club here.
I guess that's what's happened when you sponsor. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's enjoying this wonderful lunch, courtesy of Surrey Board of Trade. And thank you, Anita, for the warm welcome and your amazing video. Really pleased to be here at the first event post-COVID, as I think many of us are. So my name's Selena Bassi. I'm Vice President of Government and External Relations at a project called Woodfibre LNG. It is the little LNG project that could here in British Columbia, and I'm really pleased to tell you a little bit about our progress and where we're at today. Before I get started, I just also want to acknowledge that we are gathered here on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and ask you to please join me also in welcoming my special guests. I have with me Councillor Shayla Jacobs from Squamish Nation, Samquat, and Hereditary Chief Dale Harry from Squamish Nation. Thank you. Woodfibre, we're very pleased to be sponsoring this event at a really unique time for Canada and our natural resources. Everyone in this room knows that BC and Canada have relied on our natural resources for decades. Cities like Surrey were built on the foundation of people coming to Canada to work in those industries, and we feel the impacts across the supply chain across our province. Now we know we are at a time of global change, of the need to accelerate the net zero economy and use our low carbon resources to generate benefits for Canadians while assisting our trade partners abroad in their own times of turbulence and uncertainty. We know that natural resources in British Columbia have a significant role to play in this, and our governments, Canadian and provincial, have provided us with strong frameworks that provide certainty for industry while motivating us and challenging us to be the most sustainable producers of natural resource goods in the world. In March of this year, Woodfibre LNG announced our roadmap to be facility net zero by the time we are operational, which will be in 2027 or before. We are really excited to have put a roadmap in place that demonstrates a pathway, demonstrates that it is possible for industry to achieve government's net zero targets well ahead of schedule. And we are really excited that our sector, in the LNG sector, can be a part of the important energy transition when we know that across the world, not everyone has access to the same low carbon, reliable sources of energy that we do here in British Columbia. I'm really excited to tell you all that the Woodfibre LNG project begins construction in a few short months, and that will mark the start of one of the largest private sector projects currently in British Columbia. We're a $5.1 billion project and will provide significant employment opportunities and revenues that can be reinvested in the services and infrastructure that we all rely on, including all of those families, entrepreneurs, and citizens that live here in the beautiful burgeoning city of Surrey. We're also a provincial project, so I'm really pleased to be here at the Resources Forum. Our gas is produced in the Northeast. Our sister company is Pacific Cambrian, and they are one of the only equitable origin certified producers in British Columbia and in Canada. At our facility, as part of our net zero pathway, there's more information on the table for those that are interested. Emissions will be reduced or avoided primarily through the use of innovative technology, and where emissions avoidance is not currently possible, we have partnered with offset providers, with First Nations, as well as nature-based solutions. For those of you that don't know, we're the first project to be regulated by a non-treaty First Nation. The Squamish Nation led a really innovative, independent environmental assessment of our project, resulting in the Squamish Nation Environmental Assessment Agreement, which provides conditions that we must abide by for the life cycle of the province. And it was the first true consensus-based decision-making, as is now required in the BC Environmental Assessment Act. We are working alongside the nation to advance the calls to industry for justice of the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and we're actually holding the first meeting of our advisory committee on that topic at the Indigenous Partnership Success Showcase. So we'll see you there. We know that commitments to net zero and meaningful reconciliation are important to government. Our first speaker this afternoon has already made strides in her mandate and provided strong leadership to BC's natural resource industries by announcing the new Energy Action Framework, putting supports in place to streamline and expedite necessary regulatory processes, and exhibiting leadership in the historic agreement between the province and Blueberry River First Nations on natural resource stewardship. It is my honor today to introduce the Minister of Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation, the Honorable Josie Osborne. I'm looking forward to hearing from the Minister on how industry and government can continue to collaborate on BC's natural resources. And I'd just like to provide a brief intro to Minister Osborne, who was elected as MLA for Mid-Island Pacific Rim in 2020, and she previously served as Minister of Municipal Affairs and Minister for Land, Water, and Resource Stewardship. Prior to this, I think many of us know, she served as mayor for the beautiful community of Tofino. Everyone, please join me in welcoming BC's Minister of Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation.
Thanks so much. What a wonderful, warm introduction, and I really appreciate it. I'm so grateful to be here and to have the invitation to join you all on the territories of the Coast Salish peoples. And I want to thank Anita and everyone at the Surrey Board of Trade for welcoming me back. This is my second time in this room, so it has that feeling of familiarity, which is a very good thing when you're in Surrey. And I also want to acknowledge the guests that we have here with us today that I'm really privileged to join as well, and Minister Wilkinson, who will be here shortly, Michael Goehring from the Mining Association of BC, Linda Coady from BC Council of Forest Industries, and Richard Wong from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. It's really wonderful to be in their company and great to see everyone here. I know you're going to have a phenomenal panel with our guests here, and you're up for some very insightful discussion and points that are raised. So let me just speak briefly about the Surrey Board of Trade and how impressive it is that with 6,000 business contacts that this Board of Trade is behind such immense development and growth here in the city of Surrey. It's incredibly impressive. That's over 6,000 innovators who have tools and connections and resources to showcase what's happening here in the fastest growing city in Canada and everything that Surrey has to offer. And I really think there's no better time than the present for local businesses to be dialed into what the global market is looking for, because we all know that we're living in an unprecedented time of change and shifts in new directions. But COVID-19 is no longer a global emergency, but British Columbians have certainly all felt the pinch of the supply crunch and the sting of inflation and the rising cost of living. And at the same time, of course, we're all deeply concerned about climate change. We're acutely aware that every step, every action, every decision that we take could impact our personal and our collective carbon footprint. Some say that we haven't seen this momentous change in the world like this since the Industrial Revolution. So now really is the time to make these connections and tell the world that Surrey is open for business, especially for a clean energy future. This is also the approach that our government is taking, and it's absolutely vital that business, industry, communities, and people here in BC, also investors from far and wide, understand that we are open for business and that, yes, we can have a strong economy as we navigate changes and as we transition away from the things that no longer serve us, but towards the things that will keep our communities and our grandchildren healthy and thriving in the future. And I know that many of you who are here today really recognize this, and you recognize the important balance between growing business for economic prosperity, but also caring for the environment. And I also know that both are possible, especially if we work together. Now, more than ever, is the time for British Columbians from business and industry, Indigenous communities, academia, all orders of government to come together. The impacts of climate change are all around us, and we know that delay is not an option. Everyone knows we need to pollute less, we need to use cleaner, more affordable sources of energy, and reaching that net zero future is going to require a collective effort because we all have our own unique opportunities to contribute as we expand and we grow in this low carbon future. We already have so much that's going for us as we build into this future. We can build on the existing strengths that we have. We can take early actions that set us up for success. The province of British Columbia has incredible strengths in this fight against climate change. We have an innovative workforce that's researching clean energy technologies, including right here in Surrey. We're taking important steps to develop and grow low-carbon hydrogen production and use here in BC, for example. And in fact, hydrogen is one of our best clean solutions for significantly reducing emissions in sectors like heavy-duty transportation and industrial heat, natural gas decarbonization, things that are traditionally very hard to abate emissions from. Our energy resource sector is also exploring opportunities in methanol, ammonia, carbon capture and underground storage, just to name a few. And we've given the BC Energy Regulator, the former Oil and Gas Commission, the authority to begin regulating more than oil and gas, like geothermal and hydrogen and new alternative fuels that are helping us achieve these climate goals. And we also know that British Columbia is known the world over for our environmental, social, and governance ethic. This tells investors that when they come here to set up their operations, they can count on high standards on everything from environmental sustainability to strong Indigenous relations. Another strength, of course, that we have here in British Columbia, and you're going to hear more about it from Michael, of course, is mining in our natural resource industries. And we should all be very proud of the record-breaking numbers that we've seen from mining in the last year, nearly $740 million in exploration expenditures and a forecast of $18 billion in production. The first new greenfield mine in 8 years has opened, is underway, and 2 additional gold mines have recently restarted operations. Exploration and mining provide good-paying, family-supporting jobs for more than 30,000 people here in BC. And these are British Columbians who are working hard to supply the minerals and metals that we know we need to build the low-carbon future that works for everyone. We're Canada's only largest producer of copper, only producer of molybdenum, and the critical mineral strategy that we're developing is going to help us unlock the potential to produce even more, like nickel and cobalt, and other minerals and metals. To do this, our government set aside $6 million over the next 3 years to better understand how we can add value, grow downstream opportunities that are adding mined minerals and materials back into the supply chain. One of the other huge assets we have as we transition to this low carbon future is our clean electricity. And I think everyone in this room will know that about 98% of the power we're generating now comes from clean or renewable resources, and most of that is powered by water, making us a leader in clean electricity generation in Western North America. Earlier this year, I was really proud to take part in a historic event where we announced the environmental assessment certificate approval of the Haisla Nation's Cedar LNG project. It's a project that's innovative in its design and will produce some of the lowest carbon intensity LNG in the world using renewable electricity from BC Hydro. We also recently, as I referred to, approved a Mines Act permit for Artemis Gold's Blackwater mine. And its connection to the electrical grid is going to provide the mine with a sustainable source of low carbon electricity, the potential to produce gold and silver with some of the lowest greenhouse gas intensity emissions in the world. And these other projects that are underway right now are really showcasing what responsible resource development can look like as this world transitions to a low carbon future. All of these actions are serving us well, but we know that we need to do more if we are to achieve our climate goals and maintain BC's leadership status in this clean energy space. And that's why our government has taken steps to support the reduction of emissions from fossil fuels in industry, in business, and at home. And through the Clean BC Roadmap to 2030, we are taking actions such as phasing out utility incentives for conventional fossil fuel, space and water heating, establishing energy efficiency standards that will require all space and water heating equipment sold or installed after 2030 to be at least 100% efficient. And we're also requiring zero-emission buildings in new construction by 2030. In March, as was already referred to, we launched the new Energy Action Framework that will really help guide us in hitting these Clean BC greenhouse gas emission targets. And it sets out 4 key actions. They are a cap on greenhouse gas emissions from the oil and gas sector, a new net zero test for new LNG projects, and thank you, Selena, for highlighting Woodfiber's commitment to reaching net zero by 2027, a new clean energy and major projects office, and a new BC Hydro task force. The Clean Energy and Major Projects Office will be a one-stop shop for providing the dedicated support that major projects, clean energy projects like renewable fuel production and hydrogen need to cross the finish line, navigate the regulatory process, and provide the power and the good jobs that we know they can do. The task force creates even more capacity so we can leverage the benefits that we have in clean electricity and its abundant supply far into the future. And we're expecting that both of these key supports, the office and the task force, will be in operation very, very soon. Ultimately, what the new Energy Action Framework provides is predictability for industry, for businesses large and small, and for people. We all want that assurance and certainty about the direction that we're headed in, or the decisions that we're making are safe, are responsible, will help our families and our communities prosper long into the future. And as we navigate the green economy ahead of us, I really encourage you, and I know that you will, be working on creating those tools and systems that really show people that Surrey and British Columbia can provide that predictability. My ministry and our government will continue to partner with you to build a clean economy that works for everyone, because it's clear here in Surrey and across British Columbia that we're both a home and a destination for prospective business owners who want to carve out their niche in business, whether it's in natural resources or something else, and who want to raise families in a beautiful place and succeed in their business, whether natural resources or not. We have so much to offer here, and I really want to congratulate the Surrey Board of Trade for everything that you do, each person here today coming together to discuss this, the incredible work that you do every day to make this a better place for everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minister. The Minister does have to leave, but if you do have any questions for her ministry, if you can send it to the Surrey Board of Trade, and she and her team will be pleased to respond to those questions. So thank you so much. Another round of applause for Minister Osborne.
I didn't mean to dine and dash.
Thank you. So now I ask our panelists to join me on stage. Please help me welcome Michael Goehring, President and CEO of the Mining Association of British Columbia. Linda Coady, President and CEO of the BC Council of Forest Industries. And Richard Wong, Vice President, Regulatory and Operations for the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. So I'm going to ask each of you to speak in turn, and then we'll go into a question period before Canada's Minister of Natural Resources arrives. Michael?
Sure, thank you. We're live? Okay, thank you so much, Anita. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here today on the traditional unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples in Surrey. And before I begin, I just want to give a shout out to Table 7, Skeena Resources. They have a fantastic project at Eskay Creek in northern BC, and they do it right. They have excellent ESG performance, and we're proud of them as a BC-based developer. May is Mining Month. It's also, I understand, Innovation Week here, which is a time to celebrate the contribution that mining makes to BC. So today I'm going to provide a very brief State of the Union on BC mining and critical minerals. But I first want to acknowledge my colleagues, Linda and Richard from the forestry and natural gas sectors. Importantly, we have different commodities, but whether it's wood, pulp, gas, LNG, electricity, or minerals, we export some of the lowest carbon natural resources on the planet. And that's thanks to our early adoption and use of clean electricity. And most British Columbians have no idea, but our low carbon resources make up 45% of our province's exports. And that's foundational to BC's economy and to our way of life. So, mining. Mining helped build BC, and it remains vital to our economy today. Our sector currently supports more than 35,000 jobs with an average annual salary of $124,000, making it one of Canada's highest paying industries. And our sector provides nearly $3 billion annually in taxes and revenue to all levels of government, which is revenue that's vital to social programs. And our industry also pumps nearly $3 billion in spending on goods and services into 215 BC communities each and every year. So in fact, right here in Surrey, there's 190 mining suppliers that generate over $115 million annually in economic activity. So Surrey is essentially a mining town. The economic impact of mining is felt province-wide, but mines are also forging consent-based agreements with Indigenous nations. And take the recently permitted Blackwater gold mine as an example that the minister just referenced. Blackwater is supporting economic reconciliation with the Lacuse Dene and Alcacho First Nations through participation agreements that include well-paying jobs, contracting opportunities, and revenue sharing, in addition to over $200 million in mineral tax revenue over the life of the mine, which is quite stupendous. But the real headline today, from me to you, is that critical minerals offer British Columbians a new and generational opportunity. Critical minerals are essential to our climate goals, to our economy, and to our defense objectives. Canada has a list of 31 critical minerals. BC has or produces 16 of those. So we're talking aluminum, copper, nickel, silver, zinc, and many others. And not to leave out our precious metals, gold, which is very important. These are the basic building blocks of electric vehicles, batteries, solar cells, wind turbines, along with aerospace and defense applications. So there's a huge spotlight on critical minerals right now, and generally because we're in a period of seismic geopolitical change. Canada and our allies in the US and through Western industrial countries are no longer willing to depend on China and Russia as suppliers and processors of critical minerals. And that's why Canada and the US are working very hard to build and onshore our own domestic critical mineral supply chains. We have many other allies who are looking to Canada to provide them with the minerals and metals they need to reach their climate goals and their economic and security objectives. In fact, yesterday, Prime Minister Trudeau was in South Korea and just inked a deal between Canada and that nation on critical minerals. So all of this provides a huge opportunity for BC. We're well positioned, we're poised to lead, but this requires us to move from aspiration to implementation and to get things done. So in BC, we have more than a dozen critical mineral projects in the queue, along with opportunities to process and recycle critical minerals across the province. Two of these are nickel deposits, which are often associated with Ontario. Both of those are among the top 10 nickel deposits in the world. One, FPX Nickel, is proposing to both mine and refine nickel. And that would provide enough nickel sulfate to meet 17% of the projected North American EV battery market for nickel in 2030. So that's pretty exciting. And Teck has the potential to recycle lithium-ion batteries like those found in Teslas. And they would do that at their Trail smelter. That's a very exciting opportunity there. So there's billions in economic benefits and thousands of jobs on the table, along with opportunities for Indigenous partnerships and equity participation in critical mineral projects. And that's a critical part of critical minerals. However, to unlock this potential, we need action from governments to address the challenges with permitting and authorizations for major mine projects. And I would say it's encouraging that the federal and provincial governments are aware of this issue and are willing to make changes. And we just happen to have two senior ministers here today responsible for mining. One is departed, the other is on his way in. They both fully understand this. In fact, Minister Wilkinson said last year, it can't take up to 15 years to develop and bring new mines into production. And you can imagine if you had to wait 15 years to get a permit to put an addition onto your home, right? Likewise, the government of BC has taken steps to improve permitting, and both Minister Osborne and Premier Eby have directed more attention towards speeding up mines and natural resource permitting. And rest assured, MABC has provided recommendations to both levels of government to expedite permitting timelines. So I'll close with this. The demand for critical minerals and metals is expected to grow 6 times by 2040. That's 17 years away. The stakes are high, the opportunity unprecedented for British Columbians. That's why it's imperative we have both levels of government work together and move from aspiration to implementation so that we can get this stuff done. Because literally and figuratively, the opportunity is right under our feet, and we need to seize it. Thank you. Linda?
Okay, so we're going to move to a different part of the resource economy right now, the forest sector. And I'd like to begin by also acknowledging that we're on the traditional and unceded territories of the First Nations that Anita and Michael have already recognized. I'd also like to say that forest companies in BC are committed to advancing Indigenous reconciliation by supporting implementation of BC's Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. I'd also like to acknowledge that an MLA from Surrey, Bruce Ralston, is currently BC's new minister, relatively new still, Minister of Forests, and that we're very pleased to have the opportunity to work with Bruce. So, what the heck is going on in BC's forest sector? Well, obviously, since Christmas, lots of curtailments and closures, so it's a very challenging time, and I'll talk about some of the causes and the reasons for that, and also some of the solutions. But my main message today to you is, like the demand for critical minerals, the demand for wood and other renewable products made from forests is going to be accelerating exponentially, locally and globally. And with the right plan in place, BC and Surrey are well positioned to be part of the new opportunities that growing demand will create. Why Surrey? Why Surrey figures in this from a forest sector point of view? Well, first of all, you already have quite a few forest products operations here, as Anita was telling me. Teal Jones, one of the largest independent producers here, also a value-added producer, also S&R Mills, Partap, and other remanners along the Fraser from here and up to Hope. In addition to actual operations based here, Surrey is connected to forest product operations across the province because many of them rely on services and businesses and equipment that is provided from here. So it's you are increasingly a lower mainland hub for forest product supply chains, including engineering services, heavy-duty equipment, and new digital solutions. The numbers at the last count, like I Like Michael has his numbers, the 110 million. Our last count is 140 million from Surrey-based businesses supporting forest products operations in British Columbia through procurement. These are large and small businesses. When you add that 140 to Michael's 110, and I'm willing to bet Richard's going to have a number there, you get it up to numbers that are very substantial. So you get Surrey as a major center for natural resources, supplies, and services, and you could become an even bigger one moving forward as the skills and services and inputs required in forestry, mining, and energy become more transferable and interchangeable across our three sectors. So some opportunities there. So you may not have a highway sign, you know, as you enter Surrey that says, welcome, we are a forestry or a mining community, or we have an LNG plant. But you are very much connected, as Michael and Anita have said, to what is happening in those resource sectors, and a big part of it. So what are some of the opportunities that are happening on the forest side? As in mining, they are being driven by the need to manage impacts from climate change and reduce greenhouse gases and increase the use of renewable or more renewable materials in everyday living. And the drive for less waste means the bioeconomy, for example, is coming at us and is with us in a few places already. But moreover, from a wood products point of view, changing population demographics in North America and elsewhere in the world mean that a lot of people are currently underhoused. And new applications for wood in building homes and retrofitting homes are emerging here that are making those buildings and homes more affordable and less carbon intensive. So some big opportunities there. Of course, reality check, that's the future. Things are not so great in our sector right now. Production is down, companies are losing money, and that's having an impact on workers, suppliers, and regional communities. What's going on? Why? Well, there's three main regions. We can talk about it more later if you want, but three I'll call out to you. First of all, we all know the post-pandemic inflation has resulted in less housing construction, and that's resulted in lower prices for lumber and wood products. It was around $1,400 per 1,000 board feet. This time last year was the price, and it's less than $350 per 1,000 board feet today. And so, and our costs are, BC has a high cost environment, so we're the first out of the market when there's that kind of shift, and the last in. So that's one reason. Second is we still have a tariff on our wood products exports that go to the US, softwood lumber, but also some value-added production as well. And those of you that have been around for a while know that this is a dispute that dates back to the 1980s. Actually, I've read a paper that can date it back to the 1900s, and what gunshots were all fired over softwood lumber. But anyhow, the third reason what's going on is that there's a lot of uncertainty right now in British Columbia over access to what the industry calls economic fiber. So that's fiber that they can actually make products from that they can sell. And the competitiveness of our industry's cost structure moving forward. So no industry, let's be clear, certainly none of the ones on the table today, get certainty anymore in the world that we live in, and none of your businesses get it either. But as Michael was mentioning, and the minister mentioned, the need for more predictability is really critical in the forest sector right now, because without greater predictability, we're just not going to attract the investment to go after some of the opportunities that are on the screen for us. So we need a more stable environment for sure on fiber supply and costs. So how are we going to get that more stable environment? Well, you heard the minister talk about roadmaps. I think Michael might have mentioned a roadmap too. You might mention a roadmap. We need a roadmap for forestry. We don't have one. We need a transition plan that can help us navigate from where we are right now to where we want to be by 2030. You know, you pick the number that's relevant. This is, as I say, not exactly a radical or a far out idea, but it is a missing piece in our sector right now. As you've heard, BC has a roadmap for net zero. BC and Canada are building a roadmap for critical minerals. and energy infrastructure. Richard, I'm sure you'll mention that. And we're building a roadmap and an implementation plan for DRIPA, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So we need one for forestry. We're not in that loop for some reason. We need to be there. And it needs to be based on building on our strengths here in British Columbia, on sustainable forest management and conservation. We can use that platform that we already have to step up to even higher levels of biodiversity protection and managing climate impacts. And on managing climate impacts, BC is uniquely positioned to provide global leadership on how forests can be managed to reduce the risk of fire, to take advantage of the new carbon economy and nature-based solutions. But to do all of those things, we need that plan. One of Surrey's most famous residents, one-time residents, J.P. Kinsella, of the Field of Dreams, the author of the Field of Dreams fame, coined the term, that's now famous, build it and they will come. At COFI, we want to work with government and First Nations, companies, workers, and communities like this one to build a plan for our sector. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello? Perfect. Great. Thank you, first off, for having me here today. It's my first time at the Surrey Board of Trade, but I know that we've had a great working relationship over the last number of years, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come to your first post-COVID event. Like my co-panelists, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the land, the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. We've heard a lot already about LNG, both from Selena and also from the minister. And so I'll talk briefly, but I don't want to retread too much ground around some of what's already been touched on. I think it's fair to say, in terms of what's happening with LNG in BC, I think it's fair to say there's a lot happening with LNG in BC. We have LNG Canada Phase 1 nearing completion. We have the Woodfibre LNG project beginning construction. We have the Cedar LNG project that recently received its environmental assessment certificate. And so there's a lot of different pieces that are moving. And so this is, first off, a really great story for British Columbia and presents a really great opportunity for both BC and for Canada more broadly. Others have already talked about how the world's energy markets have really changed substantially in recent months. And we really have an opportunity here in BC to leverage the abundant supplies of secure and reliable natural gas in order to supply our allies and to supply the world more broadly. I think if I could characterize it, the LNG industry in BC is really kind of a triple play opportunity for Canada. First off, and it's been spoken about already, in the context of Indigenous partnerships, the LNG export industry in BC is already being built in partnership with Indigenous communities in the form of benefit agreements with LNG Canada and in the form of ownership stakes in facilities like Cedar LNG and others, and also with demonstrable and growing business opportunities for Indigenous communities, which I'll talk about a bit more about later. But this foundation of partnership is really important because it will turn ultimately into generations of prosperity for both Indigenous communities and for Canadians as well. In terms of lowering global emissions, we've talked a bit about that already, so I won't retread that ground too much, but certainly exporting Canada's lower emission LNG really presents an opportunity to offset other higher emitting forms of energy. We in Canada represent less than 2% of global emissions, and so we necessarily can do a lot more outside of our borders than we necessarily can do within them. And so there's really a great opportunity for us to export our resource as the responsible course of action. And then finally, from an energy security perspective, as has already been mentioned, the war in Ukraine has really changed energy markets, commodity markets worldwide. And LNG from Canada can really help to assure energy security for our trading partners, but also more generally to others around the world. Many countries in Asia and Africa have been priced out of the LNG market, and our contribution can be to help to deliver our low carbon supply into that space. I would say, the natural resources are very much fundamental to the BC economy, and so that's why I really appreciate this conversation happening, first of all, whether it be natural gas or forest products or mining products. natural resources are very much fundamental to the BC economy. We in the upstream employ about 12,000 workers directly. BC's biggest export to the United States is actually natural gas. About 1/5 of total exports to the U.S. are natural gas. And then more generally, natural gas is the second largest export by value that BC has. Natural gas royalties are obviously a major contributor to the provincial coffers. $2.2 billion worth of natural gas royalties last year were accrued to government, and just for comparison, that's about it's about the same amount of money as government received through the property transfer tax. It's also about as much as received from Forestry, and about 3 times more than from BC Hydro. One of the other pieces, though, that I would mention, and this was a piece of work that we recently undertook to better understand what does the supply chain of our industry look like in BC. We often think of BC as being, of the natural gas sector in BC as being a very sort of northern BC opportunity. And so we undertook a study recently to better understand kind of what does that supply chain look like. And what we found, I think, was quite surprising even to us. About $4.7 billion was spent by our natural gas industry across British Columbia over the period of 2018 to 2021. With about 2,400 companies across 140 different municipalities and Indigenous communities. You know, as I said, we think of the natural gas industry as very, very much focused in northern BC, but about $337 million spent in the Lower Mainland and $12 million in Surrey itself. With companies like Arctic Arrow Powerline Group. So certainly our industry is a major driver of BC's economy, but it's also a significant contributor of emissions. And so that's one of the areas certainly that we have been very diligently working with government to address. Working with the regulator, we can confirm that we're now on track to meet the methane reduction targets of 45% by 2025, and certainly more partnership and collaboration and innovation means that we'll be able to lead on responsible economic growth and lower emissions as well. One of the other areas, and the minister previously spoke about this around electrification. Electrification in BC really presents a really significant opportunity for the upstream natural gas sector to decarbonize. Ovintiv, one of our member companies, and others have a long history of electrification, and recently ARC Resources, another one of our member companies, recently announced their electrified Attachie Phase 1 gas plant. So that's another certainly competitive advantage that BC has. On the water use side, this is another very significant area for us and our members that we have been focusing on. Ovintiv, again, and I can speak about Ovintiv, I used to work for them. Their water resources hub in Northeast BC is really enabling us to reduce the amount of water use in operations. They access water that's otherwise unusable for domestic or for agricultural purposes, tap into that subsurface water, and ultimately avoid the use of about 3 million cubic meters of water over 5 years, and avoid a significant amount of truckloads of water too. So I think from my perspective, you know, there's a lot of opportunity when we talk about LNG, there's a lot of opportunity when we talk about natural gas. I think the key is that we need to ensure that we're producing responsibly. That means taking action on emissions. It means taking action on other environmental factors like water use. And then it also means partnering with the Indigenous communities in the areas in which we operate. So with that, maybe I'll turn it back to Anita for the questions.
So I would like to welcome Canada's Minister of Natural Resources, Jonathan Wilkinson. He just arrived. Let's give him a great Surrey welcome. He'll speak shortly. I do have some questions for the panel, and if you do have a question, please go to the microphone, state your name, your company name. We are recording today's session as well, which will be distributed on our social media channels. So please go to the microphone if you do have a question. But I just wanted to ask you, each of you, so you've indicated that Surrey is a mining town. Surrey is a forestry town. Surrey is an energy town. But what is it that you need from our municipal politicians in terms of being an ambassador? Any government regulation that needs to be modified to ensure that we're welcoming these projects into each of our cities, even as a regional economy through Metro Vancouver? Michael.
Thanks, Anita. Have I got the bum mic?
Here, this one works.
Okay.
Okay, I'll go first.
You go ahead.
Okay.
You go ahead.
She who holds the mic. I don't know. Anita, you and I were talking about a little bit about it at lunch, but certainly from the forest sector point of view and the domestic operations, the local operations you have here, industrial land is really important, right? And for a lot of the companies that are involved in the supply chains that support our three sectors, industrial land is really key too. And I know I live in Vancouver, I know about the values, I know about housing costs, but a strategy to hang on to the industrial land that you have as a really important element in your long-term economic strategy, I think I'd put that one at the top of my list. Now I'll give this back to you, Michael.
Thank you. As I mentioned, I mean, critical minerals are a immense opportunity for British Columbia and Canada, and Surrey does have a part to play. I mentioned that Surrey is a mining town. There are a whole slew of very innovative companies that provide goods and services to, the Trail Smelter in the West Kootenays, to the Red Chris Mine in Tahltan territory in Northwest BC. Those companies need to be competitive. They need to be supportive so that they can do what they do to support our industry. So there are basic ABCs that all of us as small and medium business people understand kind of need to happen to be competitive and to operate and to sell your products and services to other companies so that you can employ people and everybody can go home to their families and live their lives in a good and prosperous way. So it's very important that Surrey and other municipalities in the Lower Mainland across all BC have a good supportive environment for small business, right? So that they can provide that, form the backbone of this very important BC-based supply chain to provide services to mines, to LNG facilities, and to forest companies.
And I would echo what Michael said. I mean, I think, as I said in my remarks, we often think of the natural gas industry in BC as being very northern BC focused. But there's a lot of opportunity, particularly in the context of a lot of the innovation that's happening with respect to climate technologies, and that's an opportunity for businesses across British Columbia. And so, as I said, we spent about $337 million in the Lower Mainland region over the 2018 to 2021 timeframe. I only really see that spend increasing as the kind of innovation that's happening in our sector continues to advance. So I think that for us is really the key. I think it's important to convene conversations like this, particularly amongst the business communities within regions that are outside of the operating regions where our companies are, to kind of make some of those connections. And so the role of the Surrey Board of Trade, for example, is very important in that regard.
So I just wanted to ask you specifically about the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the need still for oil and gas, and how that plays into how we can still meet our climate change targets. Like, what is your perspective on that?
That is an easy question.
I only say that because the Trans Mountain Pipeline does go through Surrey as well.
Absolutely. No, and I think, as I said earlier in my remarks, I think the world's energy markets have changed very substantially in the last year, and I think that there's a clear need there's a clear continued need for oil and natural gas resources within Canada and around the world. I think that Canada has a really significant opportunity to step up in that regard, and we have an opportunity to leverage all of the low carbon benefits that we've been talking about here today to really play a positive role as the supplier of choice. I think one of the opportunities for us as Canadian operators is really to embrace all of that we have here as kind of that Canadian advantage. You know, from my perspective and from the perspective of our companies, you know, it's being a leader on climate is becoming table stakes for how it means to operate. And so I think that for us, focusing on efforts around decarbonization are very important in order to make sure that ultimately we are going to be the responsible ones that can be the supplier of choice into the future.
Linda, let's talk about forestry. Surrey is a border city. Can you expand upon what needs to be done about this softwood lumber dispute that is ongoing with the United States?
Oh, that's a great question, and I've got the minister right here in front of me now. All right. The most important thing that has to happen is that the government of Canada, Prime Minister Trudeau, and the President of the United States have to decide they want to resolve the issue. And if they want to get it done, I think they can probably find a way to come up with a modern trade agreement that can be durable. We can get away from these tariffs and the unending litigation. You don't want to know how expensive it is, not just for companies, but also for governments. You know, we have U.S. Department of Commerce in Victoria doing audits of the Ministry of Forest there for a month or two a year. Like this dispute has gone on for so long. It's costing both sides. It's bad for consumers in the U.S. It's bad for the industry and the communities here. But we need the political will, Minister, to dig in there. And I know you need the political capital behind you to do that. And, you know, those of us in the industry are trying to create that.
And Michael, from a mining perspective, you know, the Surrey Board of Trade, all boards of trades chambers, we're under the Federal Ministry of Economic Development, and we're always branding Canada as the place to invest in Canada. And you're I imagine, dealing with many countries in order to promote Canada's mining industries. What are some regulatory improvements at any level of government that need to happen in order to move the dial for your industry?
Good question. So first, let me just say, you know, we export. I think it was Minister Osborne who mentioned that, you know, our sales last year in 2022 for mining had jumped from 12.6 billion in 21 to 18 billion in 2022, and that really speaks to rising prices. But we export around the world, but the United States is a huge destination for minerals and metals and critical minerals, and both countries and under Minister Wilkinson's leadership, we're working very closely together to onshore these critical mineral supply chains, and the opportunity is significant. It was significant. It's massive, and it is generational. I mentioned FPX Nickel and their ability to create battery-grade nickel sulfate. That battery-grade nickel sulfate would go straight to both the Canadian and the U.S. auto industries into batteries, right? So, and there you likely heard of the significant investment that VW made in Ontario into battery production, and there's more to come. You know, we haven't seen this type of opportunity in decades in the manufacturing, and the opportunity is across the whole value chain, from exploration, extraction, processing, refining, and manufacturing. What do we need in order to seize that opportunity? And the minister's aware of this. We, as is Minister Osborne, we really need both the federal and provincial governments to come together and work closely together and to interlock. We've recommended that for each critical mineral project in British Columbia, and as I mentioned, there's more than a dozen that are advanced development projects, that we have project tables that kind of sponsor those projects where you have a provincial and a federal representative. You have the Indigenous partners there. You have negotiation, accountability, and the idea is to expedite the permitting and the authorization of these projects. The opportunity is right under our feet. We need to have that accountability and that drive to realize the potential of these projects. That's really, really important.
For all of you, the question is really related to how we, as all industry sectors, can be better ambassadors for each of your industries. So the Surrey Board of Trade, we're always talking about the advantages of LNG, forestry, mining, all of these energy sectors that are driving our economy. But for us to do a better job to really drive it home to those that are in the retail sector, in the development and construction sector, all of our diverse industry sectors within Surrey, what's your advice to organizations like ours to be better ambassadors for each of your industries? Michael, we'll go to you first.
Well, I would call on all of you to work with us in industry, to work with our stakeholders, our Indigenous partners, labor, your municipal, provincial government reps, federal MPs, to shake the tree, to support the critical minerals opportunity that we have, and let them know that you see value in that, and that it's important to you and your community and your family, and get the message out.
Linda.
Yeah, and Anita, I think you're doing a pretty good job. Like events like today, building the connections and actually digging deeper into the economy to see where the connections lie between the resource sector and other parts of the economy here in Surrey. So I think my advice to you is just keep doing what you're doing. It is impressive. I certainly haven't been to one of these in Vancouver, so.
And I would echo Linda's comments. I think, as I said, I think, you know, often the natural gas and all of these resource industries are very much separated geographically and sometimes in the minds of those in other parts of the economy. I think convening conversations like this are very important to help to enable those connections to be made. You're kind of serving as the marriage counselor, as it were, between different parts of the economy, and that's a very important role for you to play.
Everyone, a round of applause for our panel. Thank you so much. You may return to your seats. And we will continue on that pathway to ensure that everyone understands the benefits of each of these industries to our economy. And I want you to tell everyone also. It's now my pleasure to welcome, we've known her for a long time, from Surrey. She's the Public Affairs Manager at TC Energy, our co-presenting sponsor. Please give a warm welcome to Natasha Westover.
Anita and I actually go way back, just so you know. When I was in grade 12, going to school in Lower Tweedsmuir and Cloverdale, I had to do a work placement, and I chose the Surrey Board of Trade, and I think Anita had just started there, and so I got to work with her, and she is a powerhouse woman. So yes, my name's Natasha. I grew up right here in Surrey in Cloverdale. It's a pleasure to be here today, here on the traditional and ancestral unceded territory of the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, and other Coast Salish peoples. I am with TC Energy, and we are really honored to be here as a sponsor at the Natural Resources Industries event and recognize the Surrey Board of Trade for their amazing support and leadership in the resource sector. Again, I think we're all thrilled that we're here after the last one being in 2020, and hopefully this will just be the first of many to come in the resource sector. Our shared values and commitment with the Surrey Board of Trade is to reducing global emissions are driving an innovative, collaborative, and solutions-oriented economy. Across our country, TC Energy is driving projects that are accelerating a lower carbon economy, including investing in carbon capture, in the next generation of nuclear small modular reactors, as well as hydrogen production and pump hydro storage. Across Canada and British Columbia, our experience has taught us that solving the world's energy challenges involves learning from and working with local businesses like you. Here in BC, TC Energy has partnered with local communities to advance Coastal GasLink, energy infrastructure that will safely deliver natural gas from Northeast BC to the LNG Canada facility in Kitimat. This is the single largest private infrastructure investment in Canadian history. And I can say as of today, we are just over 87% complete on that project. This remarkable project has the unprecedented support of all 20 elected Indigenous nations along its route and will unlock Canadian natural gas for Cedar LNG, which is Canada's first Indigenous-owned LNG facility that will deliver the cleanest LNG to the world. As we speak, there are close to 200 coal plants under development worldwide today. 90% of those are in Asia. Projects like these unlock British Columbia's ability to deliver on our responsibility to help our allies like Japan and South Korea with secure, lower-emitting Canadian natural gas that is part of the solution to displace the rising production of high-polluting coal. We are capturing the unprecedented opportunity to maximize benefits for our communities, for Indigenous nations, our national economy, and the environment. I want to thank Anita. Again, she's a powerhouse here in Surrey, and to the Surrey Board of Trade for hosting this event. I think you mentioned how can we be ambassadors, and Linda said it right. By doing events just like this, it's really important. So thank you for bringing us together to listen and learn and drive the action that is needed to support our values-driven economy. I now have the distinguished honor of introducing our second keynote speaker today, Canada's Minister of Natural Resources, the Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson. As a British Columbian, Minister Wilkinson has long been a champion for sustainability and innovation in the natural resources sector. Being elected in 2015, he's held many senior ministerial portfolios, including Minister of Fisheries, Oceans, and the Canadian Coast Guard, Environment and Climate Change, and now the Minister of Natural Resources. With extensive experience in the private sector and deep roots in BC, Minister Wilkinson is a champion for the business community and industry in this province. I know I'm very grateful, and I thank all of you that we have a minister who is actually from the Lower Mainland, who understands the importance of British Columbia's resources and how Canada is a powerful contributor to solving global and local energy challenges. And I think that I speak on behalf of everybody here when I thank the minister for his government's continued support for contributing to the global energy transition in Budget 2023. When businesses come together with governments in BC and Canada, we really can advance a values-driven economy. An economy that supports goals and aspirations required to build a robust and sustainable economy for people in BC, as well as all Canadians. It's a win for us in BC here, it's a win for Canada, and it's truly a win globally. It is with great pleasure that I introduce the Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. C'est un plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui. Je suis remercié de cette aimable présentation et de m'avoir accueilli aujourd'hui à Surrey. It is always a pleasure to be back in this rapidly growing and dynamic city. As was noted, I just came across a couple of bridges from North Vancouver on my way here. I'd like to talk today a little bit about the economic future of this country. We talk a lot about climate change and the need to address carbon emissions, and that is very important, no doubt, if we want to leave a habitable world for our children. But so too is the need for us to think about how we create good jobs and economic opportunity as we move forward to ensure that Canadians going forward are prosperous. Baseball manager, philosopher Yogi Berra famously once said, "It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future." And to this, I would actually say, sorry, Yogi, some things about the future are actually quite predictable. Certainly the future must and will be, for example, a lower carbon one. Around the world, increasingly, businesses, large and small, unions, governments, and others are in a race to reduce carbon emissions and to seize those extraordinary economic opportunities that are associated with the transition to a low-carbon future. Global markets are increasingly driving this change, with investors looking for investments that are compatible with a low-carbon future and steering away from those that are not. As you folks know very well, successful businesses must learn to interpret and adapt to changes in the business environment. It's what their shareholders expect. It's certainly what their employees depend upon, and they won't be in business very long if they don't. Governments are effectively no different. To serve their citizens, they must also respond to changing circumstances and make decisive decisions. The economic future of Canadians depend on us making the right choices to ensure that Canada will thrive in a low-carbon world. The good news is that Canada is enormously well positioned to take advantage of these opportunities. We have very significant areas in which we have or can reasonably develop a sustainable comparative advantage in the world that will be relevant in the world as it transitions. It is up to us as a country to collectively make smart choices. Canada can choose to be a leader in this global economic transition, or it will simply pass us by. Going slow and just hoping for the best is a choice, but it is a much riskier choice for our children. There are effectively two paths we can take. The first accepts the reality, the scientific reality of climate change, but accepts that it is one that we can and that we must address, and accepts that the world is actually heading in this direction as a whole. The second path starts with shrugging off the damage that we already see climate change causing in our cities and towns, with respect to floods, with respect to wildfires, which we are seeing in spades in our neighbors to the east, dried up rivers, melting glaciers. This path pretends that climate change is a concern that will fade and that we don't really need to do anything about it to be healthy for the long term. I am optimistic that if we choose the first path, if we choose to seize the major opportunities that are in front of us, we can move forward in a manner that will ensure that Canada is strong and prosperous going forward. And I think it's very clear to me, anyway, that if we were to take the second path, effectively put our heads in the sand, it would mean not only where our environment will suffer, but it means our economy will suffer. I think of the first path as a plan for the future, and the second path as effectively hoping for the best. The focus of any relevant plan for the future must be on an economy that works for all Canadians, very much including those who work in the conventional energy sector and who quite naturally have questions about a global shift in energy demand could mean. It is the responsibility of federal governments in this country, national governments in this country, to care about the prospects for every province and territory in this country. We need a thoughtful strategy in which the economy changes, but grows stronger and more resilient, and the environment is also better protected. Successful strategies, as you folks in the business community will know, leverage comparative advantages. And make no mistake, we have a lot going for us in Canada. We have a very well-educated and highly trained workforce. We have a lot of the natural resources that are increasingly going to be in demand in a low-carbon future. We have strong and innovative energy and clean technology expertise. We have banking, regulatory, political, and legal systems that are stable. We have trade agreements with almost all of the major economies in the world. And we have world-leading ESG standards. So the first path, which is a plan for the future, has effectively four key elements. The first is to identify and seize those key economic opportunities that will be enabled through the transition to a low-carbon future, from critical minerals to hydrogen, from carbon capture to electric vehicles, low-carbon building products, renewables to biofuels and small modular reactors. There are enormous numbers of opportunities, and I would actually underscore what Michael said. Some of them are generational in scope. The critical minerals opportunity is not just about digging up and extracting more minerals. That is important, no doubt. It is about processing them here. It is about refining and smelting them here. It is about building the batteries here and the electric vehicles and other products that are going to be required in the context of a low-carbon future. It is an opportunity set that is available to every province and territory in this country, with the exception of Prince Edward Island, which doesn't have much in the way of critical minerals. But other than that, it is an opportunity for everyone across this great country. The Government of Canada, as you know, has been working for over 7 years on strategies, investments, improving regulations to help Canada become the clean energy and technology supplier of choice in a low-carbon world. And Canada has major comparative advantages, not just the resources, but also the fact that we actually have a non-emitting grid, which increasingly is a competitive advantage vis-a-vis our friends in the United States, for example, as people need to begin to account for the embedded carbon in the products that they are looking to sell. Every province and territory has a unique mix of their own natural resources. The best opportunities in a clean energy transition are going to look different in Nova Scotia than they do in Alberta, than they do in British Columbia. And that is why our plan has both a sectoral and a regional focus, one that aims to align the efforts of different levels of government, one that respects the rights and the interests of Indigenous peoples. One of the innovative mechanisms that we are endeavoring to use is what we call the regional energy and resource tables, which essentially are about identifying those key areas of economic opportunity in each province and territory and developing plans that align the resources of different levels of government, that align the regulatory and permitting processes, that help us to figure out how we go faster. And this is certainly something that needs to involve Indigenous leadership. And in fact, here in BC, the process is a tripartite process. But it also needs to engage with stakeholders, including industry and labor. We presently have 10 provinces and territories tables up and running. Our intent is to have tables with all, ideally, provinces and territories over the coming months. Certainly, British Columbia actually leads in this. It has established the first table. There has been a lot of progress, and I expect to be able to say a little bit more about the progress, including pilots in the regulatory area relating to mining that probably are not a lot different from what Michael is talking about. Very soon, you may actually have heard a little bit about that from Minister Osborne this morning. The second key element of the plan for the future is to have a thoughtful approach as it comes to Canada's oil and gas resources. In virtually all forecasts, worldwide demand for oil will decline within the next 10 or 15 years, and it will continue to decline as lower emission vehicles and other technologies are deployed in greater numbers. So the transition away from the combustion of fossil fuels is going to take place, but over a period of decades. Further, in 2050, according to the International Energy Agency, and they've run this scenario, which is a 1.5 degree scenario, assuming that the world actually meets the objectives, the stretch objectives of the climate, of the Paris Climate Agreement, the world will still use 25 million barrels of oil. But it will be used largely in non-combustion applications, things like petrochemicals, asphalt, lubricants, solvents, carbon graphite, and waxes. For natural gas, the IEA forecasts that global demand for natural gas in 2050 would be about half of what it is today in the 1.5 degree scenario. But again, uses will exist beyond 2050 in non-combustion applications such as ultra-low carbon hydrogen production. During the next 30 years, as the volume of hydrocarbon is reduced and uses change, countries that focused on producing hydrocarbons with ultra-low production emissions are going to be winners, while those that don't will lose market share. There is thus a critical choice for Canada. Aggressive action to reduce emissions from the production of oil and gas is critical for any producing country, and certainly any province, that wishes to capitalize on its resources during the energy transition and into a post-2050 net zero world. The third element of our plan is to build more clean power, a lot more clean power. If you think about it, a clean grid is, people often think it's necessary to decarbonize the grid, and it is. We actually have a pretty clean grid in this country. About 83% of our power is non-emitting, including nuclear. But there are provinces like Alberta, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick that have work to do to actually ensure that they actually have a non-emitting grid. But beyond that, if you think about the desire to electrify transportation, the desire to electrify home heating, the desire to electrify a range of industrial applications, it is going to drive the need for far more electrical energy than what we have today. And it's not just the traditional sort of things that we think about in the cities. Increasingly, and Michael will tell you this, mining companies are saying to us, we're interested in developing deposits, but you actually have to pull transmission and clean power there because we have to account for the embedded carbon of using diesel in our product. So we are seeing enormous increases required with respect to the generation of clean energy. That is also to create products that actually will have that comparative advantage in the world in Quebec. Very low carbon green aluminum. The source of energy is important. In Ontario, focusing right now, the steel plants, focusing on getting to the point where they're actually selling green steel. That has a value, and increasingly, that will become table stakes in the context of international markets. So we need to do a lot here. Building out a clean Canadian power grid that provides the abundant clean energy that we need is a challenge, a nation-building project, I would say, as great in scale and importance as anything we have done in the history of this country. And we need to deploy solutions that make sense for every unique region in this country. The fourth key element is, and a crucial pillar of the plan for the future, is meaningful Indigenous engagement and active participation. The Government of Canada has an obligation and is committed to advancing reconciliation across this country. It is certainly an obligation that this federal government takes very much to heart. This very much includes the natural resources space, where Indigenous consultation and partnership must be at the heart of what we do. Indeed, a robust approach to enabling Indigenous economic participation in major resource projects is a key part of advancing economic reconciliation. We have to ensure that there is participation, active input, but also that long-term benefits flow back to communities where these projects are developed. The federal government has advanced and will continue to advance a number of measures to enable greater Indigenous leadership and participation in projects. Recently, the federal budget highlighted a number of things, including measures to advance the national benefit sharing framework and a commitment to further work on this over the coming months. We have instructed the Canada Infrastructure Bank to provide loans to Indigenous communities to support them in purchasing equity stakes in projects. And we have ensured that all of the various tax-related credits, including some of them that are refundable, are very much open to Indigenous organizations in the context of participation. Thanks in part to programs like these, but thanks mostly to the leadership of Indigenous communities and organizations like the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, we have recently seen the advancement of a number of Indigenous-led projects. The Cedar LNG project was highlighted earlier. On the East Coast, the production of hydrogen for the purpose of actually shipping it to Germany, which is being led by a company called Everwind Fuels, has a partnership with 3 Indigenous development corporations. The 2-Descartes geothermal facility here in BC is 100% owned by the Fort Nelson First Nation. The Cowessess Renewable Energy Storage Facility in Saskatchewan is the country's first hybrid renewable energy system, and we just announced a little while ago the Oneida Energy Storage Project, which is the largest battery storage project in the country in Ontario. Certainly prioritizing and enabling Indigenous leadership and partnership must be a cornerstone of our approach to developing natural resources in this country. These 4 elements are foundational for a natural resource and resource-enabled industrial strategy for this country, one that will drive jobs, competitiveness, and economic prosperity for Canadians in a low-carbon future. And while this work has been underway for a number of years, and while over $120 billion has been committed prior to the recent budget, Budget 2023 represented a fundamental and generational additional investment in clean growth and in a clean growth agenda for the future. The recent budget committed an additional $86 billion to clean growth. I would tell you that the focus of the budget was largely healthcare, which had previously been announced, and the rest of it was really clean growth, including $40 billion to build out a clean electricity grid. But in addition to the grid investments, a clean technology manufacturing investment tax credit, which applies to the extraction and the processing of critical minerals, but applies to a whole range of other things, a clean hydrogen investment tax credit, a clean tech investment tax credit, the CCUS tax credit. We have committed to carbon contracts for difference. We're actually negotiating to try to do a joint carbon contract for difference in Germany to help expedite the export of hydrogen. And of course, investments relating to the national benefit sharing framework. With these historic investments, Canada is all in on becoming the clean energy and technology supplier of choice in a low-carbon world. As I mentioned off the top, there is an alternative to a plan for the future, and that is what I referred to as the second path, which is effectively hoping for the best. In my mind, this path ignores the very clear evidence as to how climate change is undermining the health and safety of people and of the planet, and is unraveling parts of the economy on which we have long depended. I would tell you that it is enormously dissonant from what I recently heard from every other energy minister in the G7 when I was in Japan just a few weeks ago. Such a head-in-the-sand approach will lead to environmental devastation, economic stagnation, as the world, very much including global investors, pass us by. Certainly, the fact that anybody would suggest that kind of a second path would be a surprise, I think, to many of us. And Canadians in every province and territory understand the reality of what type of world we are leaving to our children if we do not have a plan for addressing climate change. This is something that is increasingly recognized by provincial and territorial governments across this country, very much including a number of Conservative governments. However, at the federal level, I often still hear some say that a climate plan and a plan for the economy rests solely on technology, that somehow technology on its own will save us. I would simply say to you, technology is important. As somebody who ran clean tech businesses for 20 years, it's very important, but it's not a plan. It is a blind hope if you do not actually put into place objectives and mechanisms through which you are going to incent the bringing forward and the deployment of technology. That's regulation, that's investments, that's putting a price on carbon pollution. The hope for the best approach will lead the Canadian economy down a path of obsolescence and a loss of thousands of jobs in Canada's energy sector. Such an approach will create uncertainty and dissuade investment coming to Canada, which of course is the opposite of what we need. So the picture I have endeavored to paint today is of two different futures for Canada. One that takes the world as it is, accepts the future that seems most likely, and helps people to seize the opportunities that are available to them. And as I say, Canada has enormous opportunities available to us. If you had the opportunity to choose which country you were going to live in on the basis of the economic prospects of those countries, these days, you would choose Canada. And secondly, you might choose Australia for almost exactly the same reasons. It is a plan for the future. It is not hoping for the best. It's complex, and so it should be. It requires that we work together. It is about an economy that will work for everyone, very much including the many thousands of Canadian energy workers whose skills and work ethic will help to shape our success. Overall, a clear-eyed and thoughtful plan for the future is about a national effort to pass on an environment and an economy that will help our children and their children flourish for many decades to come. So my thanks for having me here today. I very much enjoyed having the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. And the Minister will be available after the program to speak with you. And Minister, I just wanted to say that Surrey is very important as part of the ecosystem that you're identifying. This is where the human capital is, and a very important part of your workforce development strategy to seize the opportunity for today and tomorrow. So thank you so much for coming to Surrey. Again, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Events like this simply would not happen without your support. Our co-presenting sponsors, Wood Fibre, LNG, and TC Energy, our supporting sponsor, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, also known as CAP, and our community sponsor, Simtech Manufacturing. You have to get to know this amazing hydrogen company right here in Surrey. Thank you so much, everyone. Make it a great business day. Thank you.